Κυρίες και κύριοι, εξαχότητη κυρία και κύριε πρέσβη, φίλοι και συνάδελφοι του Ολλανδικού Ινστιτούτου, με μεγάλη χαρά σας καλωσορίζουμε στην ετήσια αναφορά μας. Πρώτα απ' όλα, θέλουμε να ευχαριστήσουμε τους Έλληνες συναδέλφους μας που μας φιλοξενούν και μας βοηθούν όλα αυτά τα χρόνια. Ειδικά ευχαριστούμε την Υπουργό κυρία Μενδώνη, τις κυρίες Βικάτου, Παπαγεωργίου, Κουντούρη, Μπενίση, Κουρβέλου, Μπούμπουλη του Υπουργείου Πολιτισμού, τις κυρίες Μπατσίου, Ευσταθίου και Ροντήρη της Εφορίας Μαγνησίας, τις κυρίες Σίμουση, Σταυρουλάκη και Κοσταρέλη του κυρίου Χριστοντούλου της Εφορίας Εύβοιας, τις κυρίες Χαραμή και Κουρούνη και τον κύριο Κοντογιάννη της Εφορίας Βιωτίας, τις κύριες Πάντου, Χαράλαμπους και Μαλτέζου από την Εφορία Λακωνίας, τις κυρίες Παπασταύρου και Μερκούρη από την Εφορία Ζακίνθου. Να ευχαριστήσω και συνάδελφους όπως τον κύριο Λόλο του Πανεπιστήμιου Θεσσαλίας, τον κύριο Μπλάκλερ από το πρόγραμμα της Χαλκίδας και τον κύριο Πολίτη από την Ελληνική Εταιρεία Σπουδών Έγκυης Ανατολής. And a very warm welcome to all our colleagues from the foreign schools, universities and museums in Greece, both here with us at NIA and online. As I keep repeating this every year, NIA would not be the vibrant institute without its great team. Daily collaboration with an amazing, hardworking group of colleagues has shown its importance, its pleasure and its blessing since I came, and this will become even clearer in a moment. This annual lecture will give us an overview of our activities for the year 2024. The overview for 2025 will be presented by my successor, who will start in early 26, as my last working day at NIA will be the end of December. While I will, with sadness in my heart, leave this fabulous place behind on an everyday basis, I very much look forward to be back often for my research in future years. Without any further ado, let's start with the education section of our program. As every year, the NIA and UvA's Modern Greek Department Taalhuis Amsterdam organized two different levels of intensive Greek courses in Athens for students of our 6 participant Dutch universities, while external students are equally welcome. The 2024 NWIB Summer School was organized in July with a closing event and presentations in September. This program focused on issues of heritage tourism management, cultural heritage and climate change. The introduction week was held in Utrecht and attended by all students. They then followed lectures and conducted fieldwork in the cities of Rome, Florence and Athens. At NIA, this took place in the second half of July when it was extremely hot. 8 students from different disciplines worked on a project together using multiple methods and approaches. In 2024, the themes of this program was artists, heritage and the city. The course is offered through the Honours College of the University of Utrecht in conjunction with the Dutch scientific institutes abroad from Rome, Florence and Athens. At NIA, this is coordinated by Dr. Nicholas Karagalis from the University of the Aegean. In January 24, and in collaboration with the University of Amsterdam and the Department of Social and Cultural Anthropology of the Free University of Amsterdam, NIA organized the Winter School Migration in the Margins of Europe. It was addressed to postgraduate students and PhD candidates in the field of social sciences. They conducted a small fieldwork research and seminars in the center of Athens on the social life of NGOs and life experiences of refugees and social policy actors. In March, NIA and Leiden University's Faculty of Archaeology organized the course Audio-Visual Methods in Collaborating Archaeology, Exploring the Politics of Heritage, for postgraduate students and PhD candidates in archaeology and humanities. The students produced short archaeological heritage documentaries in the center of Athens, next to partaking in seminars. This course discussed the available methodological tools, critically reflected on their application and on how such tools can be incorporated ethically into collaborative archaeological research. In collaboration with Leiden University and Free University Amsterdam, NIA also organized the course Documentary and Multimodal Ethnographic Approaches. The students were taught various available methodological tools and up-to-date theoretical approaches of cultural anthropology with a focus on ethnographic documentary. The students produced small collaborative film projects with the active involvement of research participants in data production. The use of new media in research reflects the general transformation in these fields and the expansion of new ethnographic research practices that utilize the methodological heritage of visual anthropology. These 3 NIA courses are all organized, coordinated and partly taught by Dr. Trifon Bambilis von NIA. We now turn to NIA's research activities, beginning with archaeology. In collaboration with the Danish and Finnish institutes in Athens, NIA co-organized the international conference entitled The Constant Participant, Constructing and Affirming Identity Through Material Culture in Ancient Greek Sanctuaries and Modern Museums. The conference, attracting archaeologists and museologists, focused on the analyses of the different life cycles of objects in order to study and discuss the perception and agency in the active use stages of these objects. Its publication is now in an advanced stage of peer review. Dr. Sanne Hoffman, director of the Danish Institute, was the initiator of this conference, and it was sponsored by the Carlsberg Foundation and all 3 organizing institutes. In the context of NIA's visiting professorship program, Dr. Rebecca van Hove from Groningen University worked on her project, The Records and Religious Knowledge in Ancient Greece. She held an international symposium on the topic at NIA in April. The symposium explored how epigraphic documents organized, displayed and disseminated religious knowledge in the ancient Greek world. In the famous oral world of ancient Greek religion, writing was nonetheless everywhere. Growing interest in the materiality of inscriptions and their spatial dimensions has helped uncover the often complex ways in which ancient audiences engaged with these objects, with symbolic, communicative and practical functions often overlapping. In 2024, we continued our very successful lecture and discussion series entitled Techni, Making, Creating and Agency Networks in the Ancient Mediterranean World, initiated by myself in collaboration with the National Museum of Art and History in Brussels, the National Archaeological Museum of Athens, the Archaeological Research Unit of the University of Cyprus, the École Française d'Athènes and the University College Roosevelt in the Netherlands. In its second year, 6 lectures were delivered by scholars from Greece and abroad on a wide range of topics related to socio-economic aspects of crafting and production processes. They were streamed live and uploaded on the NIA YouTube channel. Also, the seminar called Atlas, Archaeological Topographies, Current Trends in Landscape Archaeology and Spatial Analyses, is co-organized by the Belgian School of Athens as initiators, NIA, the German Archaeological Institute and the Dipylon Society for Ancient Topography. In 2024, 6 lectures were delivered on various topics related to landscape studies and analytical methods. At the end of January 2024, Professor Spiros Troianos passed away, leaving the academic community of law in deep sadness. NIA wanted to honor his memory, so we decided to launch a new series of lectures entitled Byzantine Talks at NIA, dedicated to the memory of Professor Spiros Troianos. Dr. Daphne Penna from Groningen University presented the first one about Byzantine law and the European legal tradition. A new activity by NIA's library are the book presentations. In October, Nienke Smits presented her book Sabina, Wife of Hadrian, a special love history. This successful and well-attended event can be watched again via NIA's YouTube channel. In December, the 25th volume of Pharos, the Journal of the Netherlands Institute in Athens, was published. The journal, as you may know, is available entirely in open access. Also in 2024, the book entitled The 1969 Greek Case in the Council of Europe, a game changer for human rights, was published by Bloomsbury. The thought of this publication was inspired by scholars of the organizing committee of the International Interdisciplinary Conference with the same title. which took place under the auspices of Her Excellency the President of the Greek Hellenic Republic in December 2019 at the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens. It was an initiative of NIA and co-organized by the Danish, Swedish and Norwegian Institute in Athens and the Marangopoulos Foundation for Human Rights. The conference was supported by the Carlsberg Foundation. In the framework of our successful collaboration with Dimitris Koudouras, musician and professor at the Conservatory of Athens in the field of Baroque music, we hosted the lecture Musical Themes and Instruments in the World of Hieronymus Bosch, diving into the 15th century art and culture of the Low Countries. Dr. Koudouras addressed the symbolism of music in Bosch's work and during his time, and the way in which the famous painter used musical instruments in his works. As every year, NIA awarded several grants to young and upcoming scholars. The stipendia help PhDs in their final year. The grants are open to MA students. The residence grants help people to carry out their research through a short stay at NIA. And the development grants support MA students to orientate themselves towards a future in academia through the PhD track. At the library, the collection has been further enriched with various new acquisitions. In 2024, the NIA library also focused on its outreach. NIA's librarian, Sotiria Nicolaou, and myself were invited twice, in January and November, to the radio broadcast Libraries on FM by the Association of Greek Librarians and Information Scientists, where we presented the NIA, its library and its activities. The radio broadcasts were a collaboration with the municipal library of Iraklio Attikis and hosted by the radio station Epikinonia 94 FM. At the end of October, Sotiria Nicolaou participated as speaker in the 30th Pan-Hellenic Congress of Academic Libraries, organized by the National Kapodistrian University of Athens at the Athens War Museum. Her presentation focused on the NIA library operation and its impact on the academic community. It was the first time that the Archaeological Library participated in this specific congress. All NIA library presentations can be found on NIA's website or on YouTube channels. In April, master students from the Law Department of the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens visited our library together with their professors and attended their classes in the NIA reading room where we house the Troyanos collection. During 2024, many new contributions were added to our NIA blog, which provides first-hand accounts of students who stay at NIA to conduct research or to participate in one of our courses. Also, Dr. Rebecca van Hove contributed on her experiences as visiting professor. These blog spots prove to be a very appreciated source of information for those considering a stay here with us. Since my arrival in Athens in 2022, ongoing plans to renovate specific parts of our beautiful building needed some time to be thought through, as several plans had already been delayed due to COVID. The first jobs were done in 23-24 under the supervision and keen eye of Yanis Makris. However, the major works took place in 2025 and some smaller ones are left for next year. I report to them on this year as you all sit in this greatly renovated place today, thanks to the very hard work of the following people: Nias Yanni Makri, Panayoti Gasparatos, Emmy Makri, Sotirina Nicolaou, Willem Ledeboer, and the night guards Yanis Dimopoulos and Yanis Servoudakis. And we would still be biting in the dust today without the constant efforts of our housekeeping staff, Galina Yatsenko and Anna Pefani. Beyond NIA, we also want to thank the expert input of Alexandros Alexopoulos, Stavros Forissis, Vangelis Tsanetis, Evstathios Apostolopoulos, Lydis Nikolaos, and many of their collaborators. Without you all, there would be no annual today or any other activity in the future. Thank you all very much. The images collected by all of us show the before and after of several core areas of the building and indicate the large extent of the works done. Floors were replaced, pulled out, repaired and covered, and all the cables went underground. The staircase was repaired. Painting was done in line with the original found colors of this building, and the entire audiovisual infrastructure was updated. The final permit we await is to place a lift on the outside wall to make NIA accessible for absolutely everybody very soon. To our grief, in 2024, NIA lost 3 highly esteemed academic friends who played a decisive role in the broadening of the focus of our institute's program. Dr. Flip Lindo was senior researcher and lecturer at the Department of Sociology and Cultural Anthropology at the University of Amsterdam. At NIA, he co-developed research on migration and was tutor and advisor in the annual winter school, Migration in the Margins of Europe, which I mentioned earlier. He was widely recognized for his expertise in Dutch and Greek sociology and anthropology, research on immigrant youth, and discourses of inclusion and exclusion in Greece and the Netherlands. Professor Spiros Troianous, was Emeritus Professor in Legal History at the University of Athens and a dear teacher to many students in the field of Byzantine studies. Throughout his career, he collaborated closely with Dutch colleagues such as Herman Jan Scheltema, Professor of Roman Law and History at Groningen University. Therefore, he donated his valuable Byzantine book collection to NIA in 2018, unique of its kind, which has firmly incorporated Byzantine law and studies into its activities. Dr. Ben Slot's work encompassed historical sources and materials on Greek history and Greek-Dutch relations. In 2003, Dr. Slot collaborated with NIA on a workshop involving Greek and Dutch historians, and which laid the foundation for the following project, Dutch Archives and Greek History. In this, archival documents covering the period surrounding the Greek Revolution and the early years of Greek independence were made available digitally to Greek scholars via NIA. The publication, Dutch Archives and Greek History, a guide to Dutch archives and libraries concerning the Greeks and the Greek world between 1250 and 1940, appeared in 2007, which was supported by the Onassis and the Utopa foundations. Lindo, Troianous, and Slot provided generously to the academic ties between the Netherlands and Greece. They are dearly missed, but their legacy remains inspirational to all of us. We now turn to the fieldwork projects conducted in 2024. This map shows the sites where NIA and the Dutch universities conduct fieldwork. We start with the excavations at Magula Plataniotiki under the direction of Vladimir Stissi, Vasorondiri, Yanis Lolos, and Sofia Voutsaki. Vladimir Stissi reports as follows. In our fourth-week field season in 2024, we excavated in 4 areas within the existing 14 by 9 meter trench. The most important results regard 3 of the previously explored rooms. In the northern part of the trench, we continued work in the southwest corner of room B. This was extended northwards and eastwards to have a better view of the west and south wall of room B. The stratigraphy showed 3 thick layers of earthfill, containing some very fragmented pottery, including a few Athenian and Corinthian figured fragments, loom weights, and a few fragments of terracotta statuettes. Even though the youngest finds date to the mid-late 5th century BCE, much of the material goes back to the 6th century. Terracottas and imported fine wares suggests that at least part of the material originates in a ritual context. These finds are similar to those of last year and also to the finds in room B, south of the street. The area north of the east-west street has remained empty for a while, before a first room was built. The area was then rebuilt by adding 2 walls to the existing ones. This also explains why the west wall of room A has a neatly finished polygonal facade, as it started as an outside wall. South of the street, the trench in room A was extended to get a better picture of the surrounding of a well, found in 2024, and the pavements associated with it. This did not yield much new information because the area was disturbed by later activity. A surprising find at the bottom of the trench, however, apparently neatly placed horizontally in one of the several depressions, was a tortoise shell with remains of iron pins, probably a lyre. Since this was below the floor level, but also below the lowest level of the adjacent wall, the lyre belonged either to a fill or to a previous use phase. In room B, we encountered a continuation of the fill layers already seen in 2022 and 2023. Just as previously, and just like in the room north of the street, these contained a substantial proportion of archaic votive material, besides finds of the early to mid-5th century BCE. In the northwest part of the trench, a new north-south wall, constructed in smaller stones than the structures higher up, appeared. A similarly constructed wall was also found in room B, clearly repurposed as a foundation for the later phase. In both areas, it seems we have reached a new use level. This cannot be dated yet, but it does not seem to be much older than the classical structures above. All in all, our finds show that the sequence of the spatial organization of the area remains complex, with a possible period of abandonment in the northeast, but also construction preceding it. The general use of the area remains unclear, but the presence of archaic votive material all over suggests that it was part of a sanctuary area. This does not exclude our previous working hypothesis that these were working, storage and/or shopping spaces, but an alternative now could be that these were rooms for eating and drinking in a ritual context. The 5th century pottery is inconclusive in this specific context. We move to Euboea, where during the summer of 2024, the 4th systematic fieldwork campaign of the hinterland of medieval projects undertaken by a Dutch-Greek international team. This is a collaboration between Leiden University, the NIA, the Ephorate of Antiquities of Euboea, and the Hellenic Society for Near Eastern Studies in Chalkida. Joanita Vroom reports as follows. The region under study is defined by the valleys between the Lilas and Mesapion rivers to the north and east of the modern city of Chalkida in central Euboea, covering a research area of roughly 30,000 square meters. The chronological emphasis of the project highlights the medieval and post-medieval periods, including Byzantine, Crusader Latin, and Ottoman times, from circa the mid-4th to the mid-20th century. The main research activities in 24 encompassed an extensive survey, an intensive survey on 4 selected sites, 2 trial trenches at the Mythikas towers, material analyses of the collected finds, ranging from ceramics, glass and metal to animal bones and shell, archaeometrical analyses and public outreach events. Additional research activities included examining old topographic maps, ranging in date from the 13th to the 20th century, satellite and aerial imaging, village interviews, the study of Phoenician and Ottoman records and administrative documents, and monuments related to the research area. The map left shows the sites that were visited during the extensive survey, with a focus on more obscure, isolated rural sites, located far from the modern road network. Over 34 sites were recorded and documented in the Mesapion Valley region and the Lillantine Plain, ranging from still-standing structures including churches, towers and fortifications, to mills, cisterns, bridges, pottery scatters, and abandoned villages of late Ottoman times. An intensive field survey was conducted at 4 sites, at the medieval towers of Mythikas, Karaoli, Baleleikas, and Kastri. Each of these sites, different strategies were employed and diverse results emerged. All 4 sites were documented using photography, drone footage, and measurements taken by GPS and total station. In addition, 2 trial trenches around the medieval towers at Mythikas yielded walls of structures and many finds, including, for example, 483 fresco fragments and a small lime kiln. Digital recording, including photogrammetry with a drone, was carried out on 16 archaeological monuments in the research area to create 2D designs and 3D models. These monuments comprised 11 medieval towers and 5 churches and basilicas. Other fieldwork involved non-invasive geophysical prospection carried out with a Cassium magnetometer in areas around the medieval towers. The medieval towers of Mythicas, Karaoli and Balileikas, as well as geochemical fieldwork, such as coring of soil samples, in order to reconstruct changes in land use near the two Mythica towers and around the Karaoli tower. The project members thank Dr. Christodoulou, Dr. Costarelli and the Ephorate of Antiquities in Chalkidas staff and guards, the NIA staff, the municipalities of Chalkida and Psachna, and all collaborators, staff members and Leiden students who supported and were part of the 24 field season. From the Leiden-Cambridge Boeotia project, John Bintliff reports as follows. In 2024, the main activity of the Boeotia regional project was to re-study the ceramic finds from earlier seasons, from the ancient cities of Haliartos and Koroneia and their landscapes, as well as the ceramics from the Klimataria Crusader Estate Center, now in the water in Lake Hiliki. However, our main achievement was the final publication of our research at the ancient site of Hyetus, seen in the far north on the map. On the left, we see the Acropolis of Hyetus city in the lower right, with its main plain beyond. On the right, our urban ceramic survey allows us to trace the rise and fall of the city. Here, for example, we show the contraction of the town from its classical maximum size on the small inset map to its much reduced extent in later Roman times on the larger map. Complementary studies enrich the project. On the left, you see geophysicals revealing the grid-planned Hellenistic street and house plan, whilst on the right, trace metal soil analyses showed that the western town had been abandoned earlier and was less rich in habitation pollution, marked by lead and copper. Here, the left image shows the boundaries of this small city-state, with our intensive survey zone and its discovered rural sites in the north around the ancient town, plus the two named modern villages, as well as known sites elsewhere in the city's territory. Our urban and rural survey, aided by rich historical sources, enabled us to uncover the entire developmental story of this landscape, as we started with Neolithic and Bronze Age villages, and then progressed into the maximum flourishing of the city-state in both town and country in Greco-Roman times. Subsequently, on the right, we document a settlement displacement to the medieval villages, and finally we could investigate the foundation of the modern villages in the 15th century. This project combines intensive urban and rural survey with non-destructive technologies and with detailed studies of historical and epigraphical sources. This allowed us to uncover 7,000 years of long-term development in this little-known rural landscape and gives its ancient and medieval inhabitants their voice back into history. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the 2024 overview of the activities of the Netherlands Institute, and I would like to introduce now our speaker of tonight, Dr. Helle Hochscheid. Helle is assistant professor in archaeology and heritage at University College Roosevelt in the Netherlands as part of Utrecht University and a very dear friend. Dr. Helle Hochscheid was trained in archaeology and obtained her PhD entitled Transactions in Stone, Making Sculpture in Athenian Society in the 6th and 5th century BC, in 2010 at the University of Amsterdam. In 2015, she published her monograph Networks of Stone. More recently, she co-edited with Ben Russell The Value of Making book. Her expertise focuses on manufacture of sculpture and other crafts in ancient societies, particularly in Greece. She regularly publishes by herself and with colleagues on these topics, but also with undergraduate students. Most recently in the volume The World on Walcheren. Helle is also the founder and coordinator of the project Archaeology in the Classroom, which supports learning transferable skills in the classroom through archaeology, something we could all do actually. And she is the co-founder of the Ancient Sculpture Association. Helle is also one of the co-organizers of the Techni series, and we have often worked together on matters related to crafting in the last decade. That's why we are very pleased, Helle, to welcome you tonight to NIA and listen to your talk, Crafting, Legacies, Cross-Craft Reflections on the Athenian Akropolis.
Good evening, everyone, and very specially welcome the two ambassadors. Thank you very much for coming tonight. It is an absolute pleasure and also a privilege to be able to talk to you a little bit about crosscraft in ancient Athens today. But before I do so, I would like to thank a few people. First of all, the director, but also all the colleagues at the NIA who have been incredibly hospitable to me over the years and have supported my research in so many different ways. I would just like to say thank you for once while the opportunity is here. And I would also like to thank the organizers, two of whom are here today, of the Constant Participant Conference that Anne already talked about, because it was the starting point of my thinking about this topic that I'm going to present to you today. And last, but definitely also very important, I would like to thank my students over the past few years, who, as you will see, played an indispensable role in the research that I'm presenting today. So 4 years ago, in the middle of the COVID lockdown, my students and I were trying to come to terms with what online archaeology classes entailed. I'm sure you can all remember what that period was like. And because we didn't like it very much, we decided to move ourselves to the parking lot. Unfortunately, not to do anything interesting like excavating it. That wasn't allowed, sadly. But we had been on our screens so much that we decided to do a practical project. And this practical project was that I assigned them to build outside an Iron Age weaving frame. I was going to call it a loom, but as you will see, that is not really the right word. And to learn how to spin yarn and to weave this into, hopefully, some kind of cloth. It was a great experiment, as you can see here in the pictures. And they produced some cloth. I don't think it would have kept any early Iron Age person warm in any possible way. But something else happened that I thought was actually more important than the quality of the result. They bonded while they were learning to spin, and they argued about the best ways to build the frame, and they brought loom weights that they hadn't made themselves and invented very strange looking objects that worked as shuttles and spindle whorls. And as you can gather from my story, we had all great fun. And at graduation of some of these students, a few years later, they were so kind as to present me with gifts that they had produced themselves. And one of them I have brought with me because, to my mind, this is the best thing ever. Right? I assume you all recognize the vase, right? This is Amas's weaver vase. On the shoulder is a lovely scene of girls dancing and a veiled goddess. But on the vase itself is the entire project, the process of textile manufacturing. So this is a treasured possession, as you can imagine. So the original is in New York and looks like this and is a lot more professional looking than the loom we built, but never mind. And the whole thing rolled out looks like this. So for those of you who are online and maybe couldn't really see the wall hanging, this is what it looks like. Right, so a gift like that, I've been lucky in getting one or two other ones as well, is very special because it represents the appreciation of the students for learning something that isn't quite the usual stuff, you know. And perhaps some of them were, as you can see in this example, bitten a little bit by the techne bug, which is very good, of course. So for me, the memories that we had as a group sort of went to a higher level as a result of this object. So I can only speak for myself in this case. And for me as a teacher, this sort of represents what I'm there for in this particular community, to teach them And as a researcher, however, it represents insights that I got from this experience that I otherwise wouldn't have had. And this is what I'm very grateful for to all of the students, not just the one who made this. And as a person, for me, this reflects how much I love ancient craft. And this love became something that we all shared through this particular event. So what we have is a polyvalence of meaning in different layers. So you can put it like this: it is ancient textile practice that is then rendered in vase painting, and through archaeology is made into contemporary textile, which is a fantastic kind of layering that happens. And each time that, let's say, the scene changes hands or the subject changes hands, new craftspeople add new skills. And at the heart of it is not just a craft, but there's a craft community. So this set me thinking, what if we approach the ancient artifacts that we all love in the same way? Obviously, there are issues there. We can't ask people. That would be what you would normally do. And unfortunately, there are no sources of this kind either. But if we replace the biographical detail with archaeological context and craft historical context, would it be possible to explore some of those other meanings that normally sort of fall through the cracks because of our lack of sources? So, with this in mind, I took to the online Beazley archive just to have a sort of first exploration. And this, I looked for craft-related term words, keywords in the decoration term word. And honestly, the results were a bit disappointing. So if you look at the vases in the Beazley archive, basically there's a handful of potters and some blacksmiths, and there's, artisans in general are mentioned a few times, but there's actually a surprising lack of occurrences of many crafts that were very essential to ancient society. So that was a little bit strange. And as you probably have noticed, there is one exception, and that is spinning. And this graph makes that abundantly clear, I think. And spinning is the one thing that is actually mentioned a lot. So, it's interesting that with 96 mentions, of all the crafts that you could have depicted on vases, spinning is the one that stands out. And what is further interesting is this very global overview, I have to say, from a very quick scan on the Beazley archive. The high point of this development lies around the middle of the 5th century. And it's an interesting phenomenon that should happen, especially because it is a little bit counter to the trend. Normally, the peak lies either earlier or later. So the question is, why is spinning so abundant on these vases and other crafts aren't? A second point, and this has to do more with scholarship than with the vases themselves, is that in the decoration term words, craft activities are labeled by the person who does them, the occupation or the profession, if you will, of that person. So you have a blacksmith, or you have a carpenter, or you have a shoemaker, or you have an olive oil salesman. All of those things are labeled by profession. Spinning is not. Spinning is an activity. It is not a profession. So it's equivalent to dancing, standing, walking, that kind of stuff. And that is very strange. Why is spinning an occupation that falls in general activities rather than something that you do for a living, that you make your money with? So, in a way, what we read here is how scholarship, at least in this particular case, and I mean no disrespect to the Beazley archive, who they are basing themselves on what we, all the scholars, have produced after all, but what it represents is that as scholars, we are still looking at this activity as, oh, this happens at home by women, and it is not professional. And let's say from a modern market perspective, that might be correct. But is that the right way to look at it? So in our society, people make their own clothes, they knit and so forth, they crochet also, but they do so because they want to, and usually not because they have to. And in ancient society, the situation was much more like it was a few hundred years ago in our part of the world, where most people would make their own clothes and only the very wealthy would go to a dressmaker or a shop. It's a bit different for shoes, I must note immediately, because people have gone to shoemakers forever, it appears. I love this particular vase, and especially that she's just stood on the ladder so he can cut out the sole. Fantastic. So there is good evidence that in ancient Athens, certainly in classical Athens, you could, if you wanted and had the money, also go to a dressmaker. So the brilliant work of Edward Harris and David Lewis on occupations in the ancient world has produced enough evidence that actually we are, that there were people who were called the dressmaker or the seamstress, and seamstress as in the person who just does the sewing. So that evidence exists. But the majority of clothes making, including textile making, happens in the home. And mind you, this is a staggering amount. We'll come to that point a little bit later. If you look at the iconography of the vases depicting these textile scenes, the ones that are in the overview I just showed you, there is even, you have to be aware that there is more. Namely, if you look at scenes like this, there is spinning going on and other parts of the woolworking process, but there are also objects that have to do with textile making. So the most important one is actually this one, the kalatos. And if you include the kalatos in the search on the Beazley archive, you get very different results. So from the quarter century down to 450 BC alone, there are 402 examples of a kalatos on Greek vases, Attic vases. So we're in a completely different zone here. And of course, if you want to talk about textile making on vases, you can't just say, okay, spinning. No, you have to include the distaffs and the kalatoi and the epinetra, which is the kneecaps that they use for making the thread, and so forth. So this actually comes on top of the evidence that I've just shown you. And we are now by a factor 10 away from the previous graph that I showed you. And so this gives you an indication of how important this industry is. And to think about how much is needed, well, let's do a little experiment. All the cloth in this room, right? But then also, if you think about a home, curtains, soft furnishings, blankets, sheets, mantles for outdoors. In the army, the parts of the armor that the metal is actually sewn onto, linings of armor. Then there is things like tents, sails, backdrops for theater plays. We can be here a long time. I will spare you the complete list, but I'm sure you can come up with some of your own as well. So basically, the volume of textile that must be produced in this ancient society is huge. And this is not different in any other ancient societies. So Mary Harlow has done brilliant work, for instance, other people as well, on the textile production in the Roman context. And she says it is the largest single product manufacturing in the ancient world. It is bigger than anything weapons, anything ships, anything houses. It is the largest industry in the ancient world. And we must also presume, I would say, that the quality is decent. Because Athens, especially between the late 6th century and the early 4th century, is relatively wealthy. People can afford good stuff, good clothes, good textiles in their homes. So from that point of view, the fact that you find endless scenes with weaving and so forth in the vase paintings is actually quite understandable. People were confronted, vase painters were confronted with people, mostly women, making cloth a lot. In fact, the entire time. And secondly, it also means that they could sell these vases that had these scenes on them because people recognized what they were looking at. So, in short, textile-related crafts are very widely and intensively applied in archaic and classical Athens, as in ancient Greece in general. And so it's not really surprising that in the life of an ancient Greek polis, textiles feature in many other ways as well. So, for instance, in cult practice, ritual, myth, literature, drama. To give an example, in tragedy, textile making is frequently referenced, and I must thank one of my former students, Quinn Scanlon here, who did brilliant, as yet unpublished work, on the textile mentions in Euripides' corpus. But for instance, in the Trojan Women and the Bacchae, the royal women are weaving at the loom, and in the Thesmophoria Zousai and other comedies by Aristophanes, dresses, particularly saffron-colored ones, are mentioned. And one of my favorites is the scene where Electra and Orestes reunite in Libation Bearers, where the hyphosma, that is the cloth, that Electra once wove for Orestes when he was very little, is the thing that makes her recognize Orestes as Orestes. So it is not what is depicted on the cloth, but the weft of it itself that makes her realize, this is my long-lost brother. So in other words, the cloths represent in each of these examples the textile contribution of the maker to the household, whatever the status of the maker is in that household. But at the same time, the cloth, or even the process of making the cloth, defines them as individuals. It taps into their identity. And a final and rather horrible, I always think, example is the Tereus by Sophocles, in which Philomela weaves all the bad things that have happened to her into a robe so that she can send it to her sister and the sister can come and save her. So in literature, and in analogy, you could say, to vase painting and also other art forms, as we will see, cloths can and did present stories that are directly defined to and connected to the maker of the cloth, and even the way it is produced and how that works out in the weft, even that links directly to the identity of the maker. In ritual settings, statues of mostly goddesses, of course, were presented with tools of textile work. For instance, the statue of Athena in Erythrae held a distaff in each hand. And Artemis in Brauron has the epithet Chrysilakatos, of the golden distaff. And of course, she is famous there for being the recipient of many textile tools, but also garments themselves, which have been beautifully published on several occasions. Moreover, some cult statues not only received dresses, but were dressed in actual clothes and formed the etiology for, there was a myth forming the etiology for the ritual. So for instance, a very nice story in Pausanias relates how the festival of the Daedala at Plataea came to be. Hera was for the umpteenth time in a spat with Zeus and removed herself to Euboea because she was fed up. And to win her back, this is so Zeus, he pretended that he had wedding plans with Plataea, the daughter of Asopus. And in order to do so, he had a statue wrapped up, the text says, and put on a cart to bring her to the wedding location. Hera finds out about this and comes flying down and tears the cloth away, the dress away, the esteta, and she finds happily only a wooden statue and not actually a woman. And so they are happily reunited, at least for the time being. The story begins a little bit ambiguously. The statue is wrapped up, but for the deception to work, there has to be an actual veil that is covering that can be torn away. So in this case, we have an example from an ancient Copt text describing a statue that is dressed in real clothes. Later, this is then turned into a ritual where the statue made of wood is driven on a cart to the river and thrown into the river. And whether then she was still then dressed in a real dress, that Pausanias doesn't tell us, unfortunately. The most famous example of a statue dressed in real clothes is, of course, the statue of Athena Polias on the Akropolis. She was undressed, washed and dressed in new peplos every time that the greater Panathenaea were held, and possibly also every year, in fact, during a festival called, a sort of dual festival called the Plinteria, followed by the Kalinteria. Her garment, so we hear in the Athenian constitution, was decorated with the Titanomachy, and the patterns for this were originally selected by the Athenian council. However, because apparently some of the council members were not entirely honest in choosing what was the best design, it had to be moved to a jury court where members were selected by lot and they would decide what it was. So this suggests that there were different samples of patterns to choose from to make the dress appropriate for the goddess herself. And it is interesting that what you find here is, on the one hand, the production of a dress, which we, at least, place firmly in the female sphere of domestic activity. Ancient sources also confirm that. And on the other hand, we have the political sphere, where decisions are made in public by a jury that is democratically chosen, very much in the male sphere. That this is not necessarily an exception is proven by a decree from the middle of the 5th century that we know as the Praxi Ergidae decree. And this decree settles a matter of ritual, which was ritual administration, you could say, that was brought to the council by the women weavers of the Genos Praxi Ergidae. And there is a lot of debate about what exactly this inscription means. The text is not complete, but for the present purposes, there are 3 key points. First, Apollo had ordained in an oracle at Delphi that the Praxi Ergidae have to dress the statue of Athena in a peplos. Second, they should sacrifice to a number of deities. The list is incomplete, but it starts with the Moirai, the Fates, Zeus, Moragetes, and Ger. And finally, someone must provide a sacred fleece to the Praxi Ergidae, and to find such a fleece, the priestess of Athena will sacrifice a sacred ram and hand out the wool to those who need it. Right, the text raises an impossible number of questions, but what it does illustrate is this combination of a craft object made by women for a female deity in a ritual that is, as far as we know, only attended by women, and yet this is decided in a public, political, male domain. So in a way, the process of deciding what the ritual objects that are necessary for the ritual enactment look like is decided in somewhat of a democratic way, at least for half the population. And the mingling of these 2 spheres is something that we should keep in mind when we decide that textile making is a domestic women's affair. In fact, women's dress had also been connected to the male domain in earlier times. So if we go back to the late Archaic period, the largest, I forgot Penelope. Oh no. The largest group of one particular genre of votive dedications is the chorai. And we have here the beautiful chora, as she is known, with the colored reconstruction on the right-hand side, because it is important to remember that they were very colorful. And they stand out, all the chorai, for their exceptionally rich attire. Now, of the chorai, unfortunately, not a single one can be attributed with certainty to a female dedicant. In general, of course, the Acropolis has more male dedicants than female ones, especially for monumental votives. In this case, an additional problem is that for most of the chorai, we do not know what base belonged to them, so what they stood on, because the connection between the base and the chora is missing. A lot of them were broken off at the feet, unfortunately. So there might have been female dedicants of some of the extant chorai, but we don't know. We can't find out. We can reasonably assume, however, that all the sculptors were men, simply because we do not know of any female sculptors in Athens in this period. If someone knows of female sculptors, I would be delighted to hear it, but I've not been able to find them. So, the interesting thing about the chorai is that their clothes are so elaborate. And the reason I find that interesting is that these clothes in real life were not made by male sculptors, obviously. They were made by women. So the sculptor looked at real dress, real textiles, and reproduced a version of those in the chorai. So both the dedicants and the sculptors are male, but the makers of these clothes are female. It may seem like I'm sort of exaggerating the opposites here, but in fact it isn't actually about the opposites to my mind. The precision with which the clothes of the chora are executed suggests that there is in fact quite a lot of interaction between these two spheres. And I refer here to the Empress Dowager of Textile Research, Elizabeth Barber, a long while ago, who replicated the patterns in the running patterns on the edges of the dress. So in this chora, that would be things like this. And in this chora, you see a very beautifully reconstructed band all the way down her mantle. And she particularly looked at the meander. The picture on the left is from a different chora, but it gives you those remains of a meander. And she found something very interesting. She tried to replicate the meander herself on a loom. And she succeeded. But there was one thing that she wasn't happy about, and that was that the warp thread, so the vertical threads on a loom like we've seen before, the warp thread would be visible at the edge of the band at regular intervals. And she couldn't get rid of that. And she thought at first that she must have done something wrong. But then there was a particular chora, the one that has the number 594, and lo and behold, on the meander band of that chora, there are little white ticks at regular intervals. Now, for her, there was no doubt about this. This was not a coincidence. So the sculptor, or at least the painter who painted the sculpture, knew about this phenomenon in meandered bands in textile. Now, there has been a similar argument by the late Jaap Hemelrijk about Phrasiclea's dress. Phrasiclea, the band on the bottom of the hem of Phrasiclea's dress goes in and out with the drapery of her garment, and the pattern on the folds goes in and out, so it's obscured and revealed according to the folds of the drapery. And that means that somebody has had a darn good look at what the cloth that is patterned does when you drape it in a certain way. So in a way, you could argue that the chori are an embodiment of a cross-craft connection. On the one hand, you have sculpture, and on the other, you have textile. There are more crafts involved, of course, but I can't do everything. So that is not to say that a chora is like a one-on-one rendition of a specific person with her specific clothing. Instead, the chori do something that has been very beautifully described by Mary Stieber as mimetic realism. So something looks convincingly real as a result of mimesis, the imitation of the particular nature of an object. And I think this is a really good way to look at the story about Elizabeth Barber and the ticks in the cloth. It imitates not a particular, it imitates what happens when you make that cloth. And that led me to the question, where and how and what were the circumstances under which people were looking at each other's crafts that they would notice such things? And most likely, I think, it would be if they were working together at the same time in the same space. And then I thought, well, that's never going to happen. Who's going to make sculpture next to a loom? That sounds like a stupid idea. Well, interestingly, a recent study by Marie Lefebvre, also still not published, has made a virtual reality analysis of the activities in several, but I'm mentioning 2 sites that involved multiple crafts. And the first site is Podiotivitate. And in that particular site, she noted that spinning, most of all, but even weaving, are relatively mobile crafts. So you find evidence, loom weights and spindle whorls, in different locations in this particular site. In particular, they were surprised to find bronze and bone work in the same space as textile work. In another site, in Gordion in Turkey, spinning and weaving were combined with food preparation, which involved ovens. Again, something that we with health and safety would never do, but nonetheless, there you have it. So these are different cultures, different time periods. I realize it warns us, however, against separating crafts from each other along the lines that we would do, because in the ancient world, the concerns were of a different nature. So is it possible that a sculptor would be sat next to somebody who was weaving a cloth? Yes, that is possible. And would he have seen what was going on with that meander? Yes, he would. So, with this in mind, let's go back for a minute to the ritual of the Plinteria and the Kalenteria. That was the festival where Athena's statue is washed and dressed. In the choroi, the sculptors carved the dress in stone. But here, for the statue of Athena, it is the other way around. The statue actually gets a real dress. Now, we don't know when the festival was first instated, but it certainly precedes the Praxi Ergida decree, and likely, given the ancient date of the statue of Athena Polios, likely it goes well back into the Archaic period. So the bridge between real clothes and sculpted ones reverses in this ritual. The statue is dressed in real cloth because she embodies the goddess Athena. The embodiment of deities in statues has also been done beautifully, which I wouldn't dare to add anything there to Deborah Steiner's work. But an interesting point of view in this connection might be from cognitive science. We know from cognitive science that when we observe an activity that we have practiced ourselves, parts in our brain are activated that we would use if we were doing this activity ourselves. So by the standard, if you watch somebody working out really hard, you actually get fitter. That's what cognitive science says. What it also does is it enhances our enjoyment of the experience. Now, I'm sure that any of you who have ever done any music or dancing or other performative arts can confirm that when you know what they're doing out there, it's a different experience. So in other words, when we apply this to the ritual of washing and dressing the statue of Athena Polias, it becomes clear that the ritual applies scripts from everyday life. And it applies those to an inanimate object. The object is treated as if it was a living person undergoing cleaning and dressing. And these actions cannot be performed on the Korai, but obviously they're possible in real life. So that means that this ritual in the country bridges the gap between the static nature of the Korai and the much more volatile changing situation of real people. Cognitively speaking, watching this ritual take place would activate part of the brain that would also be used performing the actions. So where the execution of the dressing and washing ritual is exclusive to only the praxi ergidae, the observation of the ritual would trigger an embodied response from all of the observers from their own experience of ordinary, everyday washing and dressing, where the Korai bridge this mimetic gap between textile makers and sculptors. The Kalinteria bridges the gap between performers and observers. For the peplos of the statue of Athena, this effect was also about the memory of the weaving that some of the people in the audience actually had. The ritual was the culmination of this weaving, but kind of with a twist. It focused and intensified the ritual experience by transposing the daily activities involving cloth and living bodies to the artifact domain of the goddess's statue. So, let's go back to our Korai. One can imagine that a sculptor whose work was set up on a pedestal on the Acropolis would look at the statue when visiting the sanctuary and consider it with contentment. Would the woman who made the inspiration for the Korai's dress recognize her work and be equally pleased? In any case, the dresses of the Korai statues commemorate something. They are reminders of intricate textile work that was transposed into intricate sculpture. They are celebrations of not one, but two, or even more, different crafts. The visitors to the Acropolis in ancient times would know them to a large extent from their clothes and attribute living qualities to them because of their anatomy, but also because they were dressed as people. And if modern museum visitors love the Korai, there is very little reason to assume the ancients did not. Sadly, the Persian Wars, of course, put an end to them. They were damaged and given a final resting place, if you will, in the deposits, mostly on the north side of the Acropolis. What persisted was the ritual surrounding the dressing of the statue, which took place, as far as we know, north of the Erechtheion in a paved court. So this is a beautiful reconstruction of the Erechtheion. With here on the front you see the Pandroseion, the shrine of Pandrosos, one of the early king's daughters that we'll come to later. Then we have the north porch of the Erechtheion, and behind that is the paved court. Of course, the olive tree, sorry, most important thing, but never mind. And this is from a slightly more northern angle where you can see the paved court, which is lined with waterproof paving. In fact, this location where the Pliteria and Kalinteria rituals took place is quite close to the Kore burial, if you will, on the north side of the Acropolis. It is also close to the house of the Archaeology. Oh, this one. The house of the Archaeology. So we're up here in this part of the Acropolis. Where are we? The girls who wove, or at least helped weave, the peplos for the statue of Athena and lived on the Acropolis during the time that they were working on it. We see one of them depicted here in a Hellenistic stele, working on a loom with a goddess, probably Gaia, next to her. And here another girl in this 4th century relief is setting up the warp. And you can see that she has bunches of textile. So beside the house of the Areforoi and the Kore burial and the north paved area of the Erechtheion, there was also in this area a number of other shrines related to rituals of and for women. So, for instance, we have the shrine of Aphrodite and Eros, which is over here, where the Areforoi themselves performed a ritual that we don't know a lot about because it was secret, but we do know that they did it. And then we have on this side the sanctuary of Pan, who is the protector of flocks, of course. And on this side we have the shrine of Aglauros, who is the sister of Pandrosos, and also an important figure in the let's say, setting up good relations between the Athenians and the goddess Athena. Most of these shrines probably predate the Erechtheion. And actually, there are more shrines of nymphs as the entrance slope of the Akropolis Museum will amply illustrate if you want to know more. But when the Erechtheion was built, it included the lovely porch of the Caryatids, who are also remarkably well dressed, presumably in saffron again. And finally, of course, on the Parthenon itself, the central scene of the frieze shows the offering of a piece of cloth. Whichever interpretation of the Parthenon frieze you wish to follow, this is in preparation for a ritual. So in all these examples, we have shrines, we have places of cult, of ritual, we have a burial, we have iconographic renditions. In all these examples, women's weaving is at the center of this entanglement of craft and ritual. Now, we are inclined, of course, to emphasize the religious side of things. We are on the Acropolis, after all, it's very sacred, the house of the goddess, and so on. But this goddess is Athena Ergane. And Athens, as I have argued on a different occasion, between the mid-6th century and the classical period, has a huge pull for craftspeople of all kinds. The craft objects that are mentioned in inscriptions and used in rituals or set up in thanks of Athena are, first of all, the carriers of their making, the history of their making, and their craft legacy, if you will. They represent imagining, designing, planning, executing by their makers. And for me, the important point in that is, in all of these stages, the makers take decisions that express experiences and meanings from their lives. Looking at these objects through the lens of such a crossover between different crafts or between ritual practices or daily practices and crafts uncovers a kind of parallelism between ritual and craft, to my mind. Both are performative activities that evoke embodied responses from our brains and create more intense experiences through this mirroring, even when only observing the activity rather than doing it. Especially for the women of Athens, many of whom worked daily on textiles for many hours, the representations of their craft and the importance of textiles in cult added to their sense of self-identity in a way that we cannot trace in the archaeological record. In this sense, the centrality of cloth iconography on the archaic and classical Acropolis can be read to fill this gap as a tribute to the weavers of Athens. The interaction of images, objects, and rituals on the Acropolis celebrates the textiles and their makers. And through this cross-crafting, we can learn new ways to decode their legacy. Thank you very much.
Helle, thank you very much for a wonderful cross-crafting lecture on so many different levels, between crafts, between spheres of life, between materials, between different types of sources, and even between different periods. So thank you very much. I'm sure there will be questions, but not here, because tonight I invite you all, unfortunately only for the people in the room, but I'm happy there's many of you. We say goodbye to the people online and invite you all for a glass of wine and a nibble or something to eat upstairs. Thank you for coming.